It's 9 o'clock. It's 9 o'clock.
It's 9, and we start our surrogate surfaces study group at this point. So our starting question for tonight is, if we are so engrossed in our own acts, then what is the source of our anxiety and impatience? If as actors we are, if we consider ourselves as actors, if we consider ourselves as actors, troubling us, because our notions of trouble and kind of self-conscious anxiety arise from ideas of authenticity and of ideas of original narrative or of responsibility. But if we are considering ourselves as actors, what do we place the source of our anxiety on? So New Paradox rests on our existential plight. Would you like to expand?
Are you asking me, Prayas?
Yeah. I was wondering if you could expand. What are you pointing towards?
Because what we ought to do with our time is not clear yet. I mean, everyone has their own notions about what one ought to do. So I think most of the anxiety would come from there, and partly because of it not unfolding according to plan, shortfallings. There are many things really. It can't be summed up in just one statement saying this is the cause.
Yeah. So, but as actors, we don't need to think about what to do with our time.
We need to play a role. If you look at us as actors, we are all playing parts. What part do we play?
So are we determining our own part?
Are we? Is that a question? I mean, aren't we?
I think it takes a certain amount of awareness to be able to do that.
Right. Awareness towards what?
Towards the medium, towards the circumstances. I mean, I think many people are just happy to be playing roles, to come up with your own role. It's like, where do you fit in? There's a play going on, and where do you fit in? So what role are you playing? So it takes a certain amount of awareness to come up with one's role, is what I was thinking.
Right. But let's say we think, let's say we don't separate the two kinds of facts, the kind of fact which we have constructed ourselves and the kind of fact which has been constructed for us, because I personally, so I don't see these two acts differing from each other, right? So one construct is a construct, it's a construct, so we don't really need to know whether we made it, we came upon it ourselves, or it was subject, it was it's projected on us. So and what I'm wondering is, once we are part of a construct, do we have to think anymore about what to do? Do we basically just follow the the logic of what the construct dictates and demands?
I mean, what of those who question the script itself?
So where is the script? What's the script?
The construct that's placed on us. Or it could be the script that we are writing for ourselves. I'm sorry. Hi, everyone, and I'm just jumping in, so I'm sorry if I'm way off context.
No, we started with this. We started with the first question for the day was, as actors who are immersed, absorbed in our own acts, how do we explain our anxiety and impatience?
Can I ask for a clarification when you say actor, and who's this collective we that you're speaking for in the question?
So I'm engaging in an act of projection on all of us, and we can basically each of us clarify our own sense of discomfort or comfort with that projection. What I'm projecting is an actor who is playing out and who's playing out a logic which is constructed. So either that is in turn projected again on you, or that's constructed by yourself. But there is no moment of individual self-reflection, which is in a way not part of the construct.
For me, one word that I want to pick up on, which you had mentioned, is the word authenticity. Because I think in some ways, I mean, if you're talking about pre-scripted roles that we find ourselves in a way kind of repeating expectations, that are there of us, one of the real dangers for me is this question of how does one access one's own authenticity. And I think the paradox is, on the one hand, there is a problem very specific to our times, which is you can't know anything without knowing everything else. And very often there is this danger, at least if you're looking at, let's say, an actor in the terms of someone who professes a certain knowledge, of this little double thought in your head, like the Prince Mishkin problem in Dostoevsky, where there's a self-torturing questioning of one's own motives, the little voice that you hear even as you speak, telling you that you are a fake. So what does it mean to actually, access that authenticity? Is the paradox of the actor, because on the one hand, the role isn't yours, and yet at the same time, there is a struggle to access what you think is your voice.
Right, and so what you point out, what you are actually opening up for us here in this paradox, in this actors trying to access the authentic voice, which has its own mysteries involved, I guess. What is the source of maybe the discomfort? So where does the self-agonizing questioning start? Does it start at the point of wondering whether there is what is being sought, whether that exists at all, or that anxiety emerges from where does it emerge from? I mean, I really think it's still an open question for us.
I think it starts with where I said the awareness. You first of all, the actor has become aware, the self-aware, that there is a third wall. Is that what they call it? Fourth wall?
Fourth wall, that's it.
Yeah. So I think that when there is a self-awareness born, that's when the questioning starts.
But
or it could start.
What's
it doesn't
the
necessarily start.
Self? Who's the self?
the actor, and that's the question: who's the self?
Well, Prayas, I
But
think. Sorry.
I mean, we just spoke about
I mean, I
that
think
question.
the questioning and the agony begins when we realize that experience is not communicable, and language alone will not give you the direct full experience that one goes through. So I think regardless of what one does, I don't know about what one does, but certainly how one explains oneself to others through ideology, philosophy, knowing its limitations uh, triggers the questioning because you know it's limited.
But to know that it's limited, you have to be aware, right?
The full distance. Sorry?
To know that it's limited, you need to be aware that it's limited, first of all, because I might have a role which I have assumed, which I don't even know that I have assumed it. I'm just in this role.
For me, that's the question of the little voice in your head.
Yeah.
I mean, to take an analogy, it would be if I were, let's say, a theatrical actor, and I had a performance which I know for myself to have been absolutely terrible. There are two ways it can go. On the one hand, it's also deemed terrible by the people who watch it and they hate it, in which case, the authenticity of my experience is validated. On the other hand, the critics and the audience absolutely love it. But I know that it was absolutely terrible. So how am I going to access that if my mode of self-validation is in contrast or in contradiction with external forms of validation?
And that's where the self-validation, I mean, there is that self-critic. I mean, there are times when you do know that your performance actually was really not good, but people, like a lot of famous actors or celebrities, they talk about not loving that song, but it becomes a hit.
Mm-hmm.
Something like that.
But Satya, when you mention the self-awareness, I'm in a way still confused about whether you are talking about the actor's awareness of the actor's own act or the actor's awareness of who the actor is, right? So I mean, that's where you have the two layers. So in a way, the broader question for the study group, I mean, what's the relationship between the actor and the act is
right.
So I'm not sure if what is one being aware towards.
I mean, there's both of them. I agree. Like, I mean, I guess in this context, I was thinking of the actor becoming aware of the act. And therefore, through that, to me at least, it appears, once I figure out that I'm acting, or once I realize that I'm acting, then I question who's acting and who am I?
But can you do that questioning? Because what Lawrence was actually talking about about the little voice in the head, which actually to me would really prevent any total immersion in any act. It would always always maintain a distance, which would manifest as hesitation or as whatever, as a kind of friction between your own what you think is not your act and what you think is your act. I mean,
agreed.
We can easily think of these as two acts which are superimposed on each other.
And I think that's where another layer of awareness can come about, where one can, I don't know, deliberately put oneself in a state of flow, which, where you know you're doing it, but you are not thinking about it or something.
But I don't see the hesitation necessarily as some kind of an impediment. Hesitation is an aspect of time. So if you take the classical, model of hesitation, which is Hamlet's long delay between, his intention and his desire for revenge and his actual acting upon it. is basically, the longest hesitation in the history of theatre. But the hesitation is precisely the ethical substance of Hamlet.
Right. So it slows down the movement in the narrative. It slows it down. The hesitation is part of the narrative. It's not an external element.
Yeah.
Right? That's what
Yeah.
you're saying.
It's part of the process of actually creating that.
So at the, right. So at this point, our perspective on the first question seems to be that the actor is really not immersed in the act. So the anxiety is stemming from that lack of immersion, because that lack of immersion is actually part of the act. The act was never designed for being fully immersed into. Is that a kind of good, maybe collapsing down of where we are?
I do agree with the anxiety coming from the friction, from the discomfort. Yeah, I mean, there was something I wanted.
Yeah.
Sorry, no, go ahead.
No, so but what Lawrence just added, I mean, what I got from it was that the hesitation, the anxiety is actually not an external element. It's part of the act, and it's an internal factor of the act which actually slows down the flow of narrative. So.
But then, are there not those who act without anxiety because they are not aware of? See, I mean, with Hamlet, he's questioning, but there are those who do not question.
So, what are the descriptors of such? I mean, how would we qualify such acts, or maybe description of such acts? Is it about the actor, or is it about the act, which which doesn't have the questioning, doesn't involve hesitation, doesn't involve? Is it the nature of the act, or is it the nature of the actor?
It feels like both. I mean, it depends on the situation, but it feels like both could be true. I mean, if the actor is perfectly, I mean, there's a script in front of the actor, or the actor has internalized the script, or there isn't even a thought about the script, but the actor is acting.
So there's one interesting distinction that some people have made, which is the difference between knowing to act, which is there's some kind of a metanormative framework that tells me this is the right way to act, versus acting to know, which is in the absence of a predetermined metanormative framework. In the process of the action, I determine what the right way to act is. And I think that if you were to look at how we are thinking about hesitation as something that is between the two poles, on the one hand, the hesitation could arise from the simple confusion of not knowing what the right way to act is. And that's a debilitating hesitation. It's a kind of a moral conundrum that you find yourself in. The second one is more productive or generative, in the sense that even in the process of acting, you may not be entirely certain that these are, the reasons for my acting. But yet at the same time, because you are engaged in the act, it produces the reasons for the acting.
It's like a bootstrapping, the second one.
A bootstrapping in the sense?
Like, it's like you're creating your ladder and it starts creating itself. So like Lawrence was saying, the second case, you don't know the map, you're just sort of randomly walking around, but then there are some data points that you pick out, and then you look like, okay, this looks like the grid that I could, or the script that I could follow, some patterns.
But for me, I understand this this set of patterns, this this knowledge of what to make up, what will suit the act and what will not. I consider this to be the script. I mean, the script is not a static entity. It's maybe more of an algorithmic entity which allows me to generate based on a set of rules.
Yeah, which is probably my descriptor as an actor. Like, I'm a comedy actor, therefore I have these rules, and that's how I will generate the script.
So then maybe I didn't fully understand the distinction that Lawrence was trying to draw out between the two kinds of the two kinds of hesitation, the two kinds of the scripts, or the two kinds of positions that the actor finds himself in.
No, so one for me would be, let's say if you were to translate this into the moral domain, you have a prescriptive norm, thou shalt not lie, right? So within Christianity, any act of lying becomes an immoral act. In the Chinese tradition, very often it is moral to lie. But that's not a predetermined rule. So it's not like lying is a morality.
Okay.
Right? So that's a context-specific action. Whereas if you have a universal principle which determines, your knowing how to act, that confines you within the judgment of, of the rule, not of the action.
Yeah, makes sense.
Right. So it
so very typically, I mean, like the idea of the value does not lie in the principle any longer. It lies in the context of the action. So if your friend asked you, oh, does this look good on me?
Right.
In the first instance, you would have to say, regardless of whether you hurt your friend, no, it doesn't look good on you. The second one would be determined on the context. Your friend is going through a bad patch, needs some validation. You think it doesn't look good on her, but you say, yes, it does look good on you.
Right.
So that's acting to know.
So,
why have you acted in that particular manner?
Actually, I understood acting to know in a different manner. I understood acting to know as you don't know what to do. So this thing that occurs to you is, if I start groping around in the dark, something or the other will occur to me, and then I will know what to do. So I'm starting from zero and I don't know what to do. Something like that.
Yeah, in ordinary kind of everyday context, that's exactly what I mean it as.
Okay.
So our second question for the day. Yeah, Lawrence, please continue.
No, go ahead with the second.
Yeah, so our second question, so we switch questions every 20 odd minutes. So our second question is, as actors, if our biggest anxiety is that is that of breaking our acts. So in the sense, not being coherent to the with respect to the pattern that we are following, or whatever the notion of script we are following, then how do we mitigate that? If that is our biggest anxiety, and is to break the act.
So if our biggest anxiety is to break the act, so we are afraid of breaking the act.
Yeah.
Okay, then?
So we are afraid of breaking the act, or in the sense rendering a kind of image of it, which is not which is not faithful to its image. So let's say we are afraid of either breaking the act or putting on a bad act, which is the same thing.
Right.
How are they the same thing? Because
putting on a bad act is not coherent with the idea of the act itself, which is it's a perfect cohesive whole. I mean, which is the idea. I mean, so all manifestations of the idea will always be lesser, but there is a degree of degeneration is considered breaking the act.
no,
So
I think there's a difference between the two. So if you take, for example, let's say in classical theater, you have a performance which is scripted. So you have a set of dialogues, right? The rule is that you remember your dialogue. If you don't remember your dialogue, then you're breaking your act. That's very different from your judgment about whether your performance was good. So you can remember all your dialogue and still have a bad performance, and that's a different anxiety.
But if you're remembering your dialogues, but rendering them in a way which is not convincing.
Yeah.
So you are basically not doing your job.
Yeah, but there are two ways of not doing your job. One way of not doing your job is in relation to a qualitative standard, and one is an objective standard of not doing your job because you have not remembered your lines.
Not following the script, yeah.
But I mean, what I'm trying to communicate is that as an actor, the minimum description of my job is that I have to be convincing. So where I'm not convincing, I already break the act.
We can take that as the baseline for the question.
I mean, I'm proposing that. I mean, I don't know if it's useful, but
I feel.
Does it?
I mean, I personally agree. Because we are talking about the anxiety of. Either ways, there is an anxiety. I didn't say my lines according to the script, or secondly, I didn't act convincingly. Both seem like to me could cause anxiety, right? So we're talking about anxiety caused by not adhering to something.
So is choosing not to act the source of our anxiety? Meaning, I mean, is that a given that one must act? I mean, aside from the theater example that Lawrence was talking about, we're just talking in general as to we play our parts, but not playing the part.
Inability to or refusal to play the act, I mean, that would be coming from two places. Either you don't know how to act or what to act as, or you know, but you don't agree, so you refuse. But in the second case, not acting is also an act.
Could be, yes.
And for me, the classical example of this would be Arjun's hesitation before the beginning of the war, because even though going by the scripted role, which is his Kshatriya dharma, he is supposed to participate in the war. The hesitation is mitigated by Krishna's somewhat spurious arguments, which in a way doesn't really answer the question that he had posed.
Agreed.
Which is that how can I actually act in a manner which entails my killing my relatives, my teachers, my friends, etc. Right? And one can, I don't think we have the time to get into the debate on that, but if you were to take that as a model of inaction as action, then the role that Krishna plays there is one of the pedagogue who convinces him about the necessity of the action, but I'm not convinced that that was really in some ways a kind of a conflict between action and inaction. There are two different kinds of acting. and the more morally dubious one won the argument in that case.
So my impression or understanding of what Krishna did was in that moment maybe a kind of zooming out. So whereas Arjun was talking about a specific a situation, a context that dealt with human being and human relationships. Krishna chose to anchor the insistence on action to the very macro flows between karma and justice, and these things which are not essentially which make those make action not a human or not a human choice, but more, inevitable instance of flux.
It's like Arjuna was overanalyzing, and Krishna was like, you know what? He's sort of almost providing the script, saying that you have to act, and here's what you have to do, and he does that through a philosophical sort of. So in that sense, Arjuna was going to the micro, like you were saying, to the micro details, which is thinking, and thinking causes inaction. Whereas Krishna, on the other hand, is like, here is the excuse and here is the justification for doing such and such things. And those justifications include philosophizing about karma, etc.
So as far as the actual war was concerned, the battle was concerned, Lawrence, why do you think Krishna didn't play his role?
Because
I mean, he got him to do what he wanted.
Yeah, I mean, so there are two kinds of arguments that are presented, right? I mean, and in philosophy, you would distinguish them between the consequentialist and the deontological, except that it appears to be two competing ideas of consequentialism, right? So if you were to take the idea that is espoused, namely that there is a larger macro kind of perspective, whether it is on transmigration of souls or it is on the idea of time, both of them are claims or appeals to a certain kind of a reason. Now, you could say that in the Gita, the big debate is not really about how to think about some meta norm, but really about how to think about acting itself, right?
Yeah.
Or a certain kind of a knowledge that arises from action. In that sense, there is no disagreement. But if you say in terms of just the quality of the argument between the two, they appear to me as being a goading towards action, which is at the end of the day based on a consequentialism.
So consequentialism is an adherence towards the outcome and not the process which takes you there towards that outcome. Is it?
I feel like it's the agenda. I feel like Krishna came with the agenda.
So the agenda that insists, I mean, that is more concerned about the outcome.
Right.
Has morality any place in this at all? Or did anyone think about good or evil at all? Of course, it was about good and evil, wasn't it? I mean, that's what I was made to believe, actually.
I mean, I feel like it's the morality of a specific person, such as Krishna. It was Krishna's version of morality.
So, Lawrence, could you perhaps elaborate on consequentialism? I mean, said there are two.
I mean, the basic logic behind consequentialism is a concern for literally the consequences of one's actions, right? And that forms in a way the guidelines of determining morality in terms of
So
rightful
justify
or
your
wrongful
action.
conduct. Now, this is very different from, let's say, the other school, which is the deontological, which basically says that you have a principle that determines in advance the morality of your action.
So let's not worry about that. Let's just act.
Yeah, so I mean, like the one, it would seem like, it's like one is to say that, okay, as a principle, life is sacred, so taking anyone's life is, immoral, right? Now, if you have that, then the question is, how can anyone act then in a situation of
Yeah.
war? Now,
Mhm.
contrasted is the consequentialism argument. Very often, I mean, it seems as though in the Gita, the debate about, urging Arjun to act pits it against some a priori claim, right? So, I mean, Krishna's revelation of the universe in his mouth, at the end of the day, the argument ends there because he is the universe.
Right. There's no. Yeah. You can't. Then it's an infinite regress. You can't
Yeah.
question Krishna.
Yeah.
Okay.
But is Arjun breaking his own act when he is in fact listening to Krishna, or is it a kind of progression or extension of his act when he kind of agrees to not argue?
It feels like it's a question now of going against one's nature. If I'm an introvert and I'm now I'm put into an extroverted corporate situation, I have to step out of my introversion somehow, and I have to put on this act. So in that sense, your question to me sounded like he is sort of putting on an act and agreeing to do something.
I mean, what you're describing as the introvert, I would take that and I would say if we were to also think of it as a certain kind of a privation, right? Which is that any dilemma about the right action in terms of, whether this is right or wrong is always pitted against some idea of either an interiority or an exteriority. In this
Okay.
case, the dilemma was an interior one. How am I, specifically me, Arjun, to act in this situation if my hands are quivering, my lips are shaking, and I can't, find myself? The reason being, there is a reason that is coming from my interiority.
Right.
You are giving me an entire bunch of arguments about why that should not matter, because there is a larger world in terms of a normative world in which my own self-doubt is inconsequential. It's inconsequential either because it's misguided or that there is a better truth out there.
But then maybe I am right though.
No, absolutely.
Why? Yeah.
But that is really the question, right? At what point do you determine, like Nora walking out in the last scene of the doll's house in Ibsen's Doll's House, her line is, I need to know for myself who is right, the world or I.
Right.
Right? And in her case, she goes out of the scripted role that she has of being the housewife and the little pigeon or the little sparrow,
Right.
and says that I need to validate this for myself.
Right.
In the Gita, Arjun accepts the external validation.
Correct. He didn't have a chance to act out what he.
Yeah.
Maybe we don't know though. I don't know Arjuna's mind, so yeah. But I see what you're saying. Yeah.
Textually, yeah.
But as far as we are observing the acting of Arjuna, do we consider his transition or the change in his act? Do we consider that, a change in the act itself, or do we? Basically, the act is one, and the act changed because of interaction with another actor, essentially, or do we think of a break in one act and a resumption of another?
It's certainly the latter for me.
So there is a so you are saying that there is a possibility of a break in an act. So it
And
doesn't. There is no unitary envelope within which all the transitions and movements happen, but there is more of a case book where different fragments are kind of latching onto the same actor, but they don't need to be included in the same envelope necessarily.
I think the stimuli, what triggers a certain action, may differ. However, the act would be the actors. Essentially, the act would not break. What triggers, what determines how one would act, would keep changing. Meaning, the influences may vary and change. You may not be the sole driver of the act itself, but the act remains intact. I would think. That's just my opinion, though. And back it with certain examples or facts.
But then what you're saying is that there is an overarching, it sounds to me that there's an overarching envelope and the actors are within that envelope.
I mean, that is the basic, let's say a question for me, which I don't really know whether the act has a unified envelope or are we or it is a bunch of fragments and it doesn't have any unity.
Right. We should further define what an action is, really.
So that brings us to the third trigger for the day, and which is I think in a way extending what we are talking about currently. It's if our supposed agency exists only to help us be more convincing as actors, and if this agency can never be exercised, so as actors we have to essentially, if we have to be essentially within our envelope, then the only agency we have is to ensure how elegantly we remain inside the envelope.
What is agency? Is it the script or is it our own engine that drives us?
Yeah, it's the imagining of the actor's ability to go outside the script and make decisions. So for example, what we were just talking about, I would consider Arjuna's ability to ability or authority to break his act and listen to Krishna and resume another act to be a kind of agency which leaps outside the limitations of the script. And so basically this trigger that we just read, I mean, it's basically voicing out the
No, but Prayas, in the
this.
text, if you go in the text, it would be the reverse for me, because the script that is given is that the world's greatest warrior has to engage in battle. The agency for me is the moment of hesitation when he's acting out of script and saying, I don't want to be a warrior. So he's being brought back into the script. So I'm not sure how you're reading his agreement with Krishna and to engage in battle as agency then.
But it does take a certain amount of self-awareness to realize that this is what I want to do, but this is what is being asked of me. Therefore, I will go and do what is being asked of me.
That is dependent then on the judgment of the action per se, as much as how you evaluate the self-knowledge that arises. I'm not saying that, the ability to be convinced by someone does not count as action. That is also obviously a kind of an active act on your part. But what is that transformation in terms of self-knowledge that is required for you to recognize your action then as your own, which is the agency question.
So what is the transformation in the self that has to happen? Is that what you said?
Yeah.
Hmm. And that again, it comes to awakened awareness.
So it has to be based on the idea or a moment of recognizing that Krishna is not right because he is generally right.
Right.
Krishna is right because he is right for me.
At the moment, and I don't know what the hell I'm supposed to do, so I could just do this.
Yeah.
But if we begin with Krishna is not right because he's generally right, how do we know he's right this time round? And especially for me.
No, that's the thing. So that for me is the moment of the self-transformation or the self-knowledge. There is no objective criteria by which one can determine whether he is right.
Correct.
Correct.
So it's all subjective then, I mean, because how else would
I'm not really
right for you?
Yeah, I'm not sure if I'm actually through if an actor in a construction that I have modeled, if this actor goes and has a conversation with another actor, and both are following their script up till this point, but because of this conversation, this actor, in my perspective, doesn't really have the choice to change the parameters of the script and do something which breaks the construction even. I mean, the only potential, the only potential which I would see is that I could use the conversation as a transition point in my construction, but the construction always remains coherent, and in that sense, the envelope of the act, the envelope of the act, as far as the actor is concerned, is continuous. There is no break in the act.
So you're saying even the break is contained within the act. It's like
it's just the nature of the act. It's a point of transition. It's a narrative. It's a turn in the narrative, which is logically, let's say, explained by circumstances happening in the construction, like this conversation.
And the question was, how does that transformation happen? Or have we passed that?
No, so I'm not really sure how we can view either one or the other as a break in the act. So either I don't know how we can see Arjuna's hesitation to engage in the war as a break, or his being convinced again by Krishna and then going on and fighting the war as a break, which was something, which I saw as a break earlier. But maybe neither of them can actually be seen as a break, because that's just the narrative's way of turning.
Yeah, that's right. Like, that had to happen. Arjuna had to reach that point to evolve to whatever his next state is.
Or at least appear to evolve. I mean, we don't really know if there is any change in the person. We just know that that's the way it plays out.
There's a change in the act, yeah.
Well, I mean, if you looked at let's say, the logical consequences of his hesitation, and you had a situation where he drops his weapons and he walks off the battlefield, and that's the end of the Mahabharata, you would have a very different Mahabharata.
Yeah.
And so that for me is a very significant break. It's not pre-scripted at all.
But that's where I'm saying there is an agenda where the actual script is that it is a transformation and not a break. There is no option for Arjuna to have walked off. That's a very postmodern sort of thing to happen.
So, I mean, then for me, the question is, in that sense, I mean, like if you're looking at agency, is it an absolute idea of agency that you have? You know, because and this is at the heart, in a way, also of kind of Greek theater, right? Oedipus has already been scripted, and yet the entire reason that we even celebrate any of these plays is because it is in light of, you know, the gods and their scripting or their fatedness. The ability to struggle against it is the agency, not necessarily winning over it.
So the ability to struggle against what? I'm
Against
sorry,
the
I just missed that.
fated
Conditions.
Okay.
I mean, the heroic quality.
So, but then you are viewing the viewing the narrative of the Mahabharata at this point as a historical narrative of something that actually happened and not as a story, because because it seems to be about how.
No, I'm
Actually,
absolutely viewing it as a story.
But then in a story, where does the actor ever have a choice of doing one thing or the other? Like, you know, we always know that this guy is going to catch the bad guy towards the end. I mean, what I'm saying is that we don't always know that, but we know that whatever is going to happen in the story is being directed by the author of the story.
Who's the author? Yeah, that answers what we are doing here now.
But the author of Mahabharata is the author of Mahabharata. I mean, we know who the author is.
So in terms of us acting and our hesitations.
And that's where
the
frameworks that we inhabit, that's where it comes in. The structures that we are within, they might determine our script. And therefore, if I do not go to a 9-to-5 job and, you know, I might be viewed as somebody who's out of the script, you know, or I might view myself as being somebody as, oh my God, I should be in a 9-to-5 or something. So it could be like the structures are the scripts. Or we could have our own script.
Yeah, but I mean, yeah, what New Paradox is actually putting in here is who's the author. I mean,
yeah, but that's what I'm saying. Like the author could be myself, or it could be the structure that I'm inhabiting.
Yeah, and in both cases, I mean, I don't know if the author is. I don't know if the actor is allowed to know who the author is.
That's true.
I mean, not allowed and not supposed to, and you know, whatever. There is no link. There is no relationship between the author and the actor.
Yeah. Yeah, because even if I'm thinking that I'm scripting my script, it is being influenced by some other structures which are beyond my scripting capabilities.
Yeah, but that for me is really the given. I mean, in terms of how one thinks about the question of agency. I mean, if you're talking about an absolute agency in which I'm a sovereign, you know, individual with an absolute sovereignty, now that is obviously factored in by a whole range of conditions, right? In terms of society, class, language, time, history, and everything else.
That's what I mean, yeah.
So I don't think there is ever, you know, this idea of an absolute romantic sovereignty in that sense. Right. The question of sovereignty only arises in relation to the fact that there is a fatedness that you have, whatever it might be, in terms of whether it's, you know, the condition of your birth, the condition of your class, your race, your gender, whatever that might be. Within the domain of that, the little wriggle room that I create for myself in acting, in a manner that defies my scriptedness, is the recovery of the agency.
So then there is a generation of a self script, even if it's a very tiny, even if it is one sentence.
Always. I mean, like, there's the idea, for example, which is very common again in theater, especially in Shakespeare, is this idea of equivocation. Equivocation literally is, when Christian priests were being tortured and asked to admit to a certain truth, they would say it in a manner which would belie it, right? Which is that, or I would, if I kept my fingers crossed while telling you something that you want to hear, but I retain for myself that ability to keep my fingers crossed. That sovereignty is really, for me, it might amount to very little in terms of history, but can only be the only source in which one can think about sovereignty if we're thinking about it in individual terms.
So it's like free will, right? The question of whether free will exists.
Yeah, I mean, and that's the kind of question which, I mean, I don't know if we can ever access, because, I mean, we are inside a scene. We have to exit the scene to actually know who is pulling the strings of the actors in the scene, or if at all there are strings or not. But then once we exit the scene, we can't enter again. So I'm not sure if yeah, we can really know this. We can really know.
But if that's the assumption,
or we can.
Then that renders your question redundant.
The question of agency.
Yeah, I mean, if you're saying that if that's the situation.
Yeah. So.
So I'm saying that you need to recast what you mean by agency.
Right. Like if we assume that the baseline is that you can't know the script, if that's the baseline, then what is agency?
Yeah.
So I mean, so the third trigger is actually for me it's a paradoxical sentence more than a question, but so it's stating agency as as something that helps us be more convincing as actors, but then this agency can never be exercised because we cannot do something to be more convincing. We are, so in that sense, we can't really do something. It's the act which dictates our doing. It's not the description of an act is not going to specify, oh, the actor needs to try here, or the actor needs to put in more effort here to try and be convincing. The elements of the conviction that is being tried to be, be portrayed, or the construction, those are decisions in the architect's hand, in the director's hand. So, I mean, this is for me, it's a paradoxical sentence, the way it is here. So, in that sense, I don't really have a clear notion of agency, but except from the fact that if it is there, then it cannot be exercised. So I don't really have anything more than that on the table.
So we come to an end of the chat.
We have another minute left, but does my clarification, or let's say about agency, does that answer what you were asking for me to kind of state in terms of my notion of agency?
Not entirely. I'm still trying to think through how it. I mean, in terms of how you're imagining this idea of agency, maybe some of these terms are way too loaded for us to be using it.
Right.
It might be more interesting to pose them as a set of problems rather than as, because I think this entire free will agency, structure agency is not a conversation that one can actually spin something around within an hour.
It's 10
So
o'clock.
if there was a way of posing it as a problem of a certain kind of maybe a concrete nature from which one kind of abstracts, it would be easier.
Yeah, which at least takes it away from words that we somehow feel that we have a existing relationship with. So, so in this sense, have a more words which force us to think that there is already something involved. So
Yeah.
it could be more refreshing of the vocabulary set at least.
Yeah, no, and that's an interesting one for the question of acting, because I mean, in a way, this kind of linguistic division of labor, with these heavy loaded words, is that you don't have to do any work now. The word is already going to do the work for you.
Or at least you hope it
Right.
does.
Yeah, I mean, it's already done so much work.
Yeah, but they get exhausted, right? The
Yeah,
words then get
which is why,
exhausted. So,
which is why, I mean, if the question is, how do we think about these questions as our way of being or acting in the world, then if we free ourselves of this baggage of the heavy duty conceptual vocabulary that we are inheriting, then it's more of a
yeah.
challenge.
So actually, yeah, find other words to maybe more accurately capture, more precisely capture what is the matter at hand instead of yeah, that will maybe help in disambiguating what we are talking about. So
Yeah.
we'll maybe take that up for the questions that we post tomorrow. Yeah. Thanks everyone for coming online today. So we've ended our hour here, and I hope some of you can join us tomorrow at 9 p.m.
Thank you.
Yes, thank
Thanks
you
a lot.
all.
Bye.
Thanks.
See you.
Thanks everyone. Thanks. Bye.